The heart monitor screamed a flat, piercing tone, a sound that should never be heard in the sterile sanctuary of the Ashton-Drake Medical Institute. Dr. Alistair Finch, the celebrated surgeon the world watched on TV, stood frozen, his scalpel useless. His elite team was a mess of panicked shouts and frantic, useless movements. In the corner, a nurse named Clara Oliveira was mocked just for handing a surgeon the wrong clamp. A younger resident, Dr. Tanaka, sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Get back, nurse. What are you going to do, offer him a bandage?" The room erupted in nervous, cruel laughter. But 30 seconds later, as the patient's life slipped away, Clara's calm voice cut through the chaos like a laser. "Stop. Everyone, follow my lead. Now." The clamor died instantly. The most accomplished surgical team in the world froze, their eyes locked on a woman they had dismissed as a nobody, a woman who was about to defy them all and snatch a man from the edge of death. The operating theater at the Ashton-Drake Medical Institute was less a room for medicine and more a stage for miracles. Bathed in the glow of advanced LED lighting, Dr. Alistair Finch moved with the practiced grace of a maestro. Today's procedure, a highly complex aortic valve replacement on a tech billionaire, was, for him, a Tuesday matinee performance. A gallery of medical students watched from behind soundproof glass, hanging on his every word as he narrated his own brilliance. "Notice the precision, the economy of movement," Finch said, his voice smooth and amplified by his microphone. "This isn't just surgery, it's artistry." His resident, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, nodded eagerly, his eyes wide with adoration. "Incredible, Doctor. Truly." In the background, Clara Oliveira moved like a ghost. Her sole focus was the rhythm of the room, the steady beep of the monitors, the subtle shifts in the patient's vitals, the flow of instruments from her tray to the surgeon's hand. She'd been at Ashton-Drake for 3 years, and she had learned the cardinal rule: be efficient, be precise, and above all, be invisible. The surgeons were the stars, she was merely stage crew. She noticed a flicker on the EKG, a premature ventricular contraction. A single, tiny anomaly. It was likely nothing, a random misfire in the heart's electrical wiring. But it was a deviation from the baseline, and Clara's mind catalogued it, filed it away. "Debaki forceps," Finch commanded without looking up, his hand outstretched. Clara placed them in his palm a fraction of a second before he finished the sentence. He didn't acknowledge it. He never did. Dr. Eva Rostova, the anesthesiologist, yawned behind her mask, her eyes a portrait of weary cynicism. "Patient's pressure is stable, Alistair. Try not to bore him to death with your monologue." Finch chuckled, a sound devoid of genuine warmth. "Jealousy is a bad look on you, Eva. Stick to your gas passing and leave the real work to the artists." The students in the gallery scribbled notes, mistaking his arrogance for confidence. Tanaka snickered, eager to be part of the inner circle. Another PVC flicker on the monitor. Then another. They were coming faster now. Clara's eyes darted from the screen to the surgical field. The patient's blood pressure dipped slightly. "Dr. Finch," Clara said, her voice quiet but clear. "We have a run of multifocal PVCs, blood pressure is trending down." Finch waved a dismissive hand, annoyed by the interruption. "It's the anesthesia. Rostova, tighten it up." "My cocktail is perfect, Alistair," Rostova shot back, her eyes now glued to her own monitors. "This isn't on my end." The sterile, confident atmosphere began to curdle. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor became more erratic. Finch's movements lost their theatrical flair, replaced by a tense, clipped efficiency. He was no longer a performer, he was a surgeon facing a problem he hadn't anticipated, and it infuriated him. "This is unacceptable," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. He was perfectly stable. He made a decision, a bold, aggressive choice to speed up the procedure and get ahead of the complication. It was a classic Finch move, high risk, high reward, and designed to reassert his dominance over the situation. Clara saw his intention. He was going to clamp the aorta higher up, a shortcut that could restore pressure but risked causing a massive embolism if the arrhythmia wasn't controlled first. She preemptively laid out a syringe of lidocaine and a long needle on a separate tray, placing it subtly within his line of sight. An offering. A silent suggestion. Tanaka noticed the gesture. "What is that for, nurse?" he asked, his tone accusatory. Dr. Finch didn't ask for a cardiac cocktail. "His heart rate is becoming unstable," Clara stated simply, her eyes on Finch. "It could be a ventricular tachycardia." Finch finally looked at her, his eyes blazing with fury. His ego, already bruised by the complication, couldn't tolerate being questioned, or worse, corrected, by a nurse. "Are you the chief of surgery now, Oliveira? Or are you just a glorified trepasser who gets to offer her opinion?" The insult hung in the air, sharp and cruel. The other staff members looked down, avoiding eye contact. "I need a Satinsky clamp. Now!" Finch barked, ignoring the lidocaine. In the rising tension, Clara grabbed the clamp he asked for, but as she turned, her elbow brushed a secondary tray, causing a metallic clatter. It was a minor fumble, but in the hypertense room, it sounded like an explosion. Tanaka seized the moment. "My God, she's a hazard. Can't even handle the instruments." He physically shouldered her aside, grabbing the clamp himself and thrusting it into Finch's hand. "Here, doctor. Away from the butterfingers." "Get back," Finch snarled at Clara, his face a mask of contempt. "Just stand back and try not to knock anything else over. You're a distraction." He turned back to the patient, his focus absolute. He was going to fix this his way and prove them all wrong. The humiliation of Clara was just collateral damage, a necessary release valve for the pressure that was building to a terrifying crescendo. Dr. Finch applied the Satinsky clamp with a decisive, almost violent motion. For a single, beautiful second, the monitors stabilized. A collective sigh of relief started to form in the room. Finch allowed himself a smug, almost imperceptible smile. He had tamed the storm. He was still the master. But it was an illusion. The heart, deprived of blood flow and already spasming, reacted to the shock of the clamp with catastrophic violence. The erratic beeping of the monitor dissolved into a chaotic, meaningless squeal. Ventricular fibrillation. The heart was no longer beating, it was quivering uselessly. "He's fibrillating." Rostova yelled, her cynical facade shattering to reveal raw panic. "Alistair, he's arresting." The smug smile evaporated from Finch's face, replaced by a mask of horrified disbelief. The blood drained from his cheeks. This wasn't happening. Not in his OR. Not to his patient. The calm, controlled stage had transformed into a scene of pure chaos. "Paddles! Give me the damn paddles, now," he roared. Tanaka, his hands suddenly slick with sweat, scrambled for the defibrillator. He fumbled with the gel, his movements clumsy and panicked. The sycophant was gone, replaced by a terrified young man completely out of his depth. "Charging to 200. Tanaka shouted, his voice cracking. "Clear." Finch slammed the paddles onto the patient's chest. The body convulsed, a grotesque parody of life, then fell still. The monitor's chaotic line remained unchanged. "Nothing. Again. Go to 300. Finch screamed, his voice raw. Meanwhile, Clara stood by her instrument tray, a statue of serenity in a sea of pandemonium. She wasn't watching the surgeons, she was watching the clock. Her training had burned a relentless timer into her brain. With every passing second, the patient's brain was starving for oxygen. Permanent damage was imminent. Death was closing in. She watched Finch's disorganized panic, Tanaka's useless fumbling, Rostova's frantic injections of epinephrine that were doing nothing. They were throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. But it was chaos, not medicine. "Clear." Tanaka yelled again. Another violent jolt. Another failure. "It's not working," a junior nurse cried out from the corner of the room. "Suction. I need more suction." "There's too much blood," Finch commanded, shoving Tanaka aside and grabbing the tool himself. but his hands were shaking so violently he could barely direct the nozzle. He was no longer a surgeon, he was just a terrified man watching his reputation die on a gurney. His legacy, his TV shows, his best-selling books, all of it was turning to ash. He looked up, his wild eyes scanning the room for a solution, for anyone to blame. And then he saw her. Clara. Standing perfectly still. Her calmness felt like an accusation, an indictment of his failure. It enraged him. They shocked the patient a third time. The result was the same. The high-pitched squeal of the monitor finally gave way to the single, soul-destroying note. A flat line. Silence descended upon the room, broken only by that horrifying, continuous tone. It was over. Rostova hung her head. No cardiac output. He's gone, Alistair. Finch stared at the flat green line, his face pale, his body trembling. Defeated. Humiliated. In a desperate, last-ditch effort to deflect the catastrophic failure from himself, his eyes fell on Tanaka, who looked back with tear-filled terror. Tanaka, needing his own scapegoat, looked past the surgeon and saw Clara. In a final, pathetic burst of the arrogance that had filled the room just minutes before, he sneered at her, his voice a venomous whisper. "Well, nurse?" Standing there like a statue. "What are you going to do, offer him a bandage?" The challenge was absurd, a cruel, ridiculous joke at the moment of death. It was the final jab, the last insult in a long chain of them. But it was also the spark that lit the fuse. The entire team stared at her, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Finch was already turning away, ready to call the time of death and begin the long, agonizing process of damage control. It was in that precise moment of absolute hopelessness that Clara took a single step forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but it resonated with an authority that silenced the very air in the room, cutting through the monotone of the heart monitor. "Stop. Everyone, follow my lead. Now. Hey, before we see what happens in that room, can you do me a quick favor? If you believe that true skill doesn't need a fancy title, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This channel is dedicated to stories just like Clara's, stories about the unsung heroes who rise up when the world tries to count them out. It takes just a second, and it ensures you won't miss a single moment of triumph. Thanks for being a part of our community. Now, let's see a master at work." For a full 3 seconds, the only sound in the room was the dead drone of the flatline. Dr. Finch's face, already pale, turned crimson with rage. He opened his mouth to scream, to call security, to have this insubordinate nurse thrown out of his operating room and his hospital. But the words never came. Because Clara was already moving. There was no panic in her actions. There was no hesitation. It was the pure, focused economy of motion of someone for whom chaos was a natural habitat. She snatched the syringe of lidocaine she had prepared earlier and thrust it toward the anesthesiologist. "Dr. Rostova, push 100 milligrams of lidocaine, direct 4, she commanded. Her voice was level, calm, and absolute. "Dr. Tanaka, get your hands off those paddles and start deep chest compressions. 120 a minute. Now." Tanaka, who had been frozen in a state of terrified paralysis, blinked. The sheer, unshakable authority in her voice bypassed his ego, his fear, everything. It was a soldier's command, and his body reacted before his mind could. He dropped the paddles and lunged for the patient's chest, immediately beginning the deep, rhythmic compressions she had ordered. Rostova hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting to the apoplectic Dr. Finch. But she saw the logic in Clara's command, an antiarrhythmic to stabilize the heart's electricity, compressions to manually pump oxygen to the brain. It was the correct, by-the-book response, something Finch had failed to order in his panic. With a curt nod, she injected the lidocaine. "Who in God's name do you think you are?" Finch finally sputtered, taking a step toward her. Clara didn't even look at him. She was already scanning the monitors, her mind processing a dozen data points at once. "You have 30 seconds of oxygen left in his brain before the damage is permanent," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You can either stand there and yell, or you can make yourself useful. I need a thoracotomy tray and a rib spreader. And get me a 5-0 proline stitch with a Castroviejo needle holder. The specificity of her request stunned the room into silence. A thoracotomy, cracking the chest open, was a brutal, last-ditch maneuver. And the instruments she named were for delicate, vascular microsurgery. This was not nursing. From the observation gallery, Dr. Marcus Thorne, a semi-retired trauma surgeon famous for his work in war zones, leaned forward, pressing his face against the glass. He had been invited as a guest lecturer and had been watching Finch's artistry with a bored expression. Now, his eyes were wide with disbelief. "My God," he whispered to a terrified student beside him. The student was watching the chaos, but Thorne was watching the nurse. "Look at her hands. No tremor. Look at her eyes. She's not panicking. She's scanning, assessing." He pointed a trembling finger. "That's not a nurse. I don't know who she is, but she has the focus of a combat surgeon. She's been to war." Down in the OR, the other nurses, who had been cowering in the corners, suddenly had a new commander. They flew into action, a well-drilled team that had just been waiting for a competent leader. The thoracotomy tray appeared in seconds. Clara took a scalpel from the tray. She turned to Tanaka, never breaking the rhythm of her commands. "Keep those compressions steady and hard. Don't stop until I tell you." She looked at the patient's bare chest, then at Dr. Finch, who was standing beside her, utterly dumbfounded, a statue of impotent fury. His OR had been taken from him. "You tore the ascending aorta when you put that clamp on in a panic," she stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple diagnosis. "The heart is quivering because it has nothing to pump. The shocks were never going to work." She held out her hand to the scrub nurse, who slapped the needle holder into her palm. "I'm going to open his chest, manually massage the heart back into rhythm, and suture the tear you created." She finally looked Finch in the eyes, her calm gaze more powerful than his rage. "The least you can do is hold the rib spreader. Or would you prefer to just watch?" Dr. Finch didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was a maelstrom of shock and fury, but his body, trained for decades to respond to surgical commands, betrayed him. When a scrub nurse thrust the cold steel of the rib spreader into his hands, he took it. He was no longer the star, he was an accessory. Clara didn't wait for his consent. The scalpel in her hand moved in a single, swift, unhesitating arc down the patient's chest. It was a perfect incision, precise and deep, made with a confidence that bordered on supernatural. The chaos and fumbling of minutes ago felt like a distant nightmare. This was control. This was mastery. The chest was open. "Spreader," she commanded, and Finch, his face a ghostly white behind his mask, moved to obey. He placed the tool, and with a sickening crank of its gears, the patient's ribcage was opened to the world. And there it was. The human heart. Quivering uselessly in its cavity, bathed in pooling blood. The flat line on the monitor droned on, a soundtrack to their failure. Clara dropped the scalpel and plunged her hands directly into the patient's chest. The entire room gasped. Her fingers wrapped around the heart, her touch gentle but firm. And then she began to squeeze. It was a rhythmic, powerful compression, open-heart cardiac massage. She was pumping the heart with her own hands, forcing blood to the starving brain. "Tanaka, you can stop compressions now," she said, her voice calm, her eyes never leaving the surgical field. Tanaka stumbled back, his arms aching, his face stained with tears of shock and relief. He stared at Clara's hands, inside a man's chest, doing the impossible. For 10 seconds, she continued the manual rhythm. Then, on the monitor, a flicker. A single, blessed spike in the green line. And then a beep. The room held its breath. Another beep, weak and slow, but it was there. A rhythm. "We have a heartbeat," Dr. Rostova whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Sinus bradycardia at 40 beats per minute. It's weak, but it's there." She looked at Clara with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. "How did you?" Clara didn't answer. She was already working. Suction, she ordered, and a nurse was instantly at her side, clearing the blood. Now she could see it clearly, a small, jagged tear on the wall of the aorta, exactly where she knew it would be. Finch's catastrophic mistake. He saw it too, and a low, wounded sound escaped his lips. It was the sound of a man's entire world collapsing. He was not just a failure, he was a butcher, and this quiet, invisible nurse was here to clean up his mess with the skill of a god. Clara took the Castroviejo needle holder. The tiny needle and the thread, thinner than a human hair, seemed to disappear in her gloved fingers. But then she went to work, and what followed was not surgery, but a form of art. Her stitches were impossibly small, impossibly perfect. Each pass of the needle was precise, efficient, creating a flawless seam on the delicate tissue of the body's largest artery. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. It was like watching a master weaver at a loom. In the gallery, Dr. Thorne was narrating in a hushed, trembling voice. "Do you see that? That's a continuous suture on a high-pressure vessel, performed during cardiac massage. It's unthinkable. Most surgeons couldn't do that on a stable patient in perfect conditions. She's not just repairing the damage, she's resculpting it." He shook his head, his mind reeling. This is a one-in-a-generation talent. Where in God's name has she been hiding? Down below, the atmosphere had transformed. The panic was gone, replaced by a sacred silence. The only sounds were the steadying beep of the heart monitor, Clara's quiet commands for instruments, and Dr. Rostova's periodic updates, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each one. Blood pressure is 90/60 and rising. Heart rate is stabilizing at 70. Oxygen saturation is back to 98%. Each update was a testament to the miracle unfolding before them. Dr. Finch stood there, holding the retractor, his arms trembling not from fatigue, but from the sheer, crushing weight of his own inadequacy. He was a spectator at the greatest surgical performance he had ever witnessed, and it was being performed by the woman he had dismissed, humiliated, and tried to cast aside. Clara placed the final stitch. She tied it off with a series of knots so quick and perfect her fingers were a blur. The bleeding stopped completely. The suture line was a work of art, a perfect, clean seal. The patient was stable. The crisis was over. She had single-handedly wrestled a man from the clutches of death. She slowly withdrew her hands from the chest cavity and, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, took a deep breath. The room remained utterly silent, captivated by the steady, life-affirming beep of the monitor she had resurrected. Clara stepped back from the table, her posture relaxing for the first time. The surgical field was clean, the repair was perfect, and the heart inside the patient's chest was beating with a steady, reassuring rhythm. The miracle was complete, but the job was not. Her eyes, sharp and clear, scanned the room, reestablishing order. "All right," she said, her voice now softer, but still imbued with an unbreakable authority. "Let's close him up. Dr. Finch, you can release the spreader on my mark." Finch, who seemed to have aged a decade in the last 10 minutes, blinked as if waking from a trance. He looked down at the tool in his hands, then at the living, breathing patient he had nearly killed. He nodded numbly, his pride so completely shattered that all that remained was a hollow shell. "Dr. Tanaka," Clara continued, her gaze shifting to the young resident who was staring at her as if she were a deity. "You will place the chest tubes. Left and right pleural space. I will supervise." This was, in its own way, more shocking than the surgery itself. She was not just taking over, she was teaching. She was instructing the very man who had mocked her, treating him not with contempt, but with the firm patience of a mentor. Tanaka picked up the tools, his hands shaking, not from fear this time, but from a profound sense of humility and shame. He began the procedure, and twice, he faltered. Both times, Clara's voice was there, calm and steady, correcting his angle, guiding his hand. "A little higher, doctor. You need to avoid the phrenic nerve." He followed her instructions wordlessly, the lesson burning into his soul. As they worked, Dr. Rostova gave the final, glorious report from her station. All vitals are holding steady. We're getting good, strong pulses. I've done a preliminary check on his pupil response. It's perfect. No sign of hypoxia. She paused, her voice thick with unshed tears. There's no brain damage. You didn't just save his life, Clara. You saved him. The surgery was finished. The last suture was placed, the final drape removed. The patient, who minutes ago had been a corpse on a table, was now a sleeping man, his chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. He was alive, whole, and completely unaware of the legend that had been born in this room. As the team began to move the patient for transport to the ICU, the adrenaline that had held the room together finally dissipated, leaving a heavy, emotional silence in its wake. This was the moment of reckoning. Tanaka, his face streaked with sweat and tears, walked over to Clara, who was quietly arranging her instruments on a tray as if it were the end of any other routine procedure. He stopped in front of her, his mouth opening and closing, unable to form the words. Finally, he managed a choked whisper. I have never seen anything like that. I am so sorry. For what I said. For what I did. Thank you. Clara simply nodded, her eyes offering not judgment, but a quiet, weary understanding. Dr. Finch did not speak. He stripped off his gloves, dropping them into a biohazard bin with a sense of finality. He stared at his own hands, the famous, million-dollar hands of a celebrity surgeon, as if they were foreign objects. They trembled, not with the lingering effects of adrenaline, but with the deep, cellular shock of his own failure. He looked at Clara, this quiet nurse, and in her calm demeanor, he saw the reflection of his own screaming ego and profound inadequacy. Without a single word, he turned and walked out of his operating room, a king abdicating his throne. Just then, the doors to the OR swung open. Dr. Marcus Thorne strode in, his face a mask of awe and disbelief. He ignored the stunned nurses, bypassed Tanaka, and walked straight to Clara. He looked her up and down, his experienced eyes taking in her simple uniform, her steady hands, her exhausted but calm expression. In 30 years of trauma surgery, from Mogadishu to Manhattan, I have never seen a save like that, he said, his voice raspy with emotion. That wasn't a procedure you learn at Harvard. That was a battlefield improvisation of the highest order. He paused, his eyes searching hers. I have to ask, Nurse Oliveira. Where did you serve? Clara looked up at the legendary surgeon, a faint, tired smile touching her lips for the first time. Kandahar Province, 2nd Battalion, she said softly. I was a medic. Thorne slowly shook his head, a look of profound respect dawning on his face. He finally understood. He was not in the presence of a talented nurse. He was in the presence of a decorated war hero who had simply been hiding in plain sight. Clara finished cleaning her tray, her duty done. She walked out of the OR, leaving behind a team that would never be the same, and a steady, rhythmic beeping on the heart monitor that was the sole, humble testament to her greatness. The story of what happened in Operating Room 3 did not spread through the Ashton-Drake Medical Institute as a rumor, it spread as a shockwave. The nurses who had witnessed the event spoke in hushed, reverent tones in break rooms and hallways. They described the chaos, the celebrated Dr. Finch's complete meltdown, and the impossible calm of Clara Oliveira as she took command. They spoke of how she cracked a man's chest with her bare hands and massaged his heart back to life. It sounded like a myth, a piece of folklore, but every single person who was in that room told the exact same story. The legend was cemented into fact by Dr. Marcus Thorne. He had gone directly from the OR to the office of the Chief of Staff, Dr. Wallace, and recounted the entire event with the fiery passion of a true believer. He called Clara's performance the single greatest act of medical heroism he had ever witnessed. He didn't just praise her, he condemned Finch, describing his actions as a catastrophic failure of ego and a disgrace to his profession. The word of a living legend like Thorne was immutable. By lunchtime, the entire hospital knew the king had fallen, and a quiet nurse was the new hero of Ashton-Drake. Clara, however, was nowhere to be found. She didn't seek out the praise or the whispers of awe. After leaving the OR, she went straight to the women's locker room, the scent of sterile antiseptic still clinging to her. She peeled off her scrubs, took a long, hot shower, and let the water wash away the adrenaline and the tension. She sat on a simple wooden bench, wrapped in a towel, her hands finally allowing themselves a slight tremor. Her victory wasn't the gasps of the staff or the respect of a famous surgeon. Her victory was the quiet, steady rhythm of the heart monitor she could still hear in her head. A young resident found her there, sent to fetch her for a debrief. "You know, everyone is talking about you," the resident said, her voice filled with awe. "They're calling you a miracle worker." Clara simply picked up her fresh set of scrubs. "Is the patient stable in the ICU?" she asked. "Yes, completely," the resident replied. "Good," Clara said, her voice soft. "That's all that matters." For Dr. Alastair Finch, the fallout was immediate and brutal. He was summoned to Dr. Wallace's office before he even had a chance to process his own failure. He walked in to find Wallace and Dr. Thorne waiting for him, their faces like stone. There was no discussion. There was no opportunity for him to spin a narrative or shift the blame. "I have sworn statements from 7 members of your surgical team, Alastair," Wallace said, his voice dangerously low. "I also have the word of Dr. Thorne, who believes your license should be reviewed by the medical board for gross negligence and conduct unbecoming of a physician." Finch opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a deflated balloon, all his bluster and arrogance gone. "You are suspended from all surgical and patient-facing duties, effective immediately," Wallace continued, his words like hammer blows. "A full peer review board will be convened. Your television show's production company has been notified that you are on an indefinite leave of absence. Security will escort you from the premises. You are not to contact anyone on the staff." It was a complete and total excommunication. In the space of an hour, Dr. Alastair Finch had gone from a god to a pariah. He didn't protest. He simply nodded, a broken man, and allowed a security guard to lead him out of the hospital he had once ruled. Dr. Tanaka's reckoning was of a different kind. His guilt and shame were a suffocating weight. The memory of his own sneering voice mocking Clara moments before she saved a man's life played on a loop in his mind. He knew his career at Ashton-Drake was likely over, but his punishment had to be more than that. He needed absolution, and he knew only one person could offer it. He found Clara near the end of her shift, checking on a different patient's chart. He approached her cautiously, like a penitent approaching a shrine. "Nurse Oliveira," he started, his voice barely a whisper. She looked up, her expression neutral. "What you did today, it changed everything I thought I knew about being a doctor. I followed a man who taught me how to be arrogant, how to be dismissive. I almost helped him kill a patient." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I don't want to be that kind of doctor. I want to be the kind that saves people. Like you." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Please. How do I start over? How do I learn what you know?" Clara looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the arrogant resident from the OR, but a scared, humbled young man at a crossroads. "You don't learn it from a person," she said simply. "You learn it from the patient. Stop trying to be the most important person in the room. Start trying to make them the most important person. Read your trauma manuals. Practice your suturing on sponges until your hands don't shake. And listen to your nurses." She closed the chart and looked him in the eye. "That's the only place to start." Dr. Eva Rostova found Clara as she was clocking out for the day. The anesthesiologist, who usually moved with a world-weary slouch, stood tall, her eyes clear for the first time in years. Her cynicism, the hard shell she had built around herself, was gone, replaced by a raw, painful clarity. "I saw it," Rostova began, her voice quiet. "On the monitor. Those PVCs you called out. I saw them too, and I dismissed them. It was easier than picking a fight with Alastair. It's been easier for a long time." She looked away, toward the setting sun glinting off the hospital's glass facade. "I became a doctor to save lives, and somewhere along the way, I settled for just getting through the day. I let his ego run that room, and it almost cost a man his life. She turned back to Clara, a sad smile on her face. You didn't just save that patient today, Oliveira. You reminded me what it means to actually be a doctor. The one who speaks up, no matter who it is you're speaking to. She took a folded piece of paper from her pocket. I just submitted this to Wallace. It's my resignation. I'm joining a Doctors Without Borders mission in Yemen. I figure it's time I went somewhere the patient is more important than the surgeon's reputation. She held out her hand. Thank you, Clara. Clara shook it, seeing in the older woman's eyes not an ending, but a new, hard-won beginning. Clara's apartment was small, clean, and quiet. It was a world away from the gleaming, art-filled halls of the Ashton-Drake. Here, the only art was a collection of small, neatly tended succulents on the windowsill, and the only status symbol was a well-worn copy of a field medicine textbook on her nightstand. She changed into a simple t-shirt and jeans, the familiar comfort of anonymity settling over her like a warm blanket. She was just making tea when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Ms. Oliveira, this is Dr. Wallace. The chief of staff's voice was warm, filled with a deep, newfound respect. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to personally extend my gratitude for your actions today. What you did was, well, it was unprecedented. I just did my job, Doctor, Clara replied simply. You did far more than that, Wallace insisted. And the board of directors and I agree. We would be honored if you would accept a position on our surgical staff. We will waive the residency requirements, of course. Consider it a chief fellowship in trauma surgery. You can name your salary. The position is yours. It was the ultimate prize. A golden ticket. The chance to have the title, the status, and the recognition she so clearly deserved. It was everything Alistair Finch had, and more. A week ago, any nurse in the country would have killed for this opportunity. Clara looked around her quiet apartment, at the simple life she had chosen. She thought of the battlefield, the screams, and the quiet satisfaction of a life saved with no audience to applaud. Thank you, Dr. Wallace. That's a very generous offer, she said, her voice steady. But I have to decline. My place isn't as a surgeon. I'm a nurse. I'm a medic. That's where I'm needed most. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I don't understand, Wallace stammered. My skills aren't for a single OR, Doctor, Clara explained. They're for the moments when things fall apart. If you truly want to honor what I did today, don't give me a promotion. Give me a classroom. A classroom? Create a new department, Clara proposed, a sudden fire in her voice. A mandatory trauma response and crisis management program. For everyone. Surgeons, residents, nurses. Teach them how to communicate when they are under pressure. Teach them how to function when the monitors start screaming and the plan fails. Let me build a team of combat medics to teach them. Let me make sure that no one in your hospital ever freezes in a crisis again. She paused. I will lead that program. But I'll do it as Nurse Oliveira. Dr. Wallace was silent for a long moment, processing the sheer, selfless audacity of her request. She wasn't asking for a reward, she was demanding a revolution. She was using her one moment of ultimate leverage not for her own gain, but to protect every future patient who would ever pass through their doors. Consider it done, Ms. Oliveira, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. The department is yours. Clara hung up the phone. She picked up her cup of tea and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The world could talk, they could call her a hero, they could offer her a crown. It didn't matter. Her value wasn't something they could give her. It was something she had forged in fire and carried in the quiet stillness of her own heart. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that true value is not defined by a fancy title or a loud voice, but by quiet competence and grace under fire. It's about knowing your worth, even when the world is determined to overlook you. We all have moments where we feel underestimated. Have you ever had a moment where you had to prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Let's create a space that celebrates these moments of quiet triumph. If you believe that character is more important than reputation and that true heroes don't need a spotlight, hit that follow button to become part of our community. Thank you for being here, and never forget the power you hold, waiting for the right moment to shine.